Thanks for joining me for the weekly dose of Emuna for Shabbat Kodesh, a short audio lesson that injects Emuna into our Shabbat. So today we're going to take a look at where and how the Shabbat Kodesh is described in the Sefer Torah. In fact, the 10 Commandments are actually listed twice in our Torah. Once it's mentioned in the second book of Exodus, and the second time it's mentioned in the fifth book of Deuteronomy. Now, both times where the Shabbat is mentioned in the Aseret Dibrot, they're actually both almost identical, with the exception of one difference, which we're going to discuss today. In Exodus, it reads Zachor when it mentions Shabbat Kodesh, and in Deuteronomy, it mentions Shamor, in order to keep the Shabbat Kodesh. So first it's written in Exodus, Zachor, to remember Shabbat Kodesh, and Deuteronomy it actually reads to observe, to keep the Shabbat Kodesh. Another major change that we also note in the listing of the mentioning of the Shabbat in the Aseret Dibrot is in the Exodus version, the reason is actually emphasized to observe the Shabbat, which means that it's something that's universal, that we need to remember that Shabbat, when Shabbat came, Hashem completed the creation and everything was done. So it's sort of a universal belief at that point, of course, in the creation that Hashem had created the entire universe. In the Deuteronomy version, on the other hand, it's mentioned more and emphasized more about the fact that keeping the Shabbat would mean that we should keep it in order so that our maidservant shall rest just as we do. Because why? Because from our own experiences, the Jewish people, we know what it was like to be a slave, and so just as we were a slave, we want to give them rest as well. Another thing we noticed, and certainly, of course, everything has its reason. So we want to understand, of course, in particular, why it is that these two versions are, different. In Tehillim, in Perek Samach Bet, Pasuk Yud Bet, 62, verse 12, it's actually written that God has spoken once, twice have I heard this. And what do we learn from this pasuk in Tehillim is that, in essence, Hashem speaks everything once, but mortal man, us, human mortal, man, cannot understand, of course, everything as one lump word and expression, but we hear everything in separation, in words. So we see Zachor and we see Shamor, but in essence, it actually, Hashem had said Zachor v'Shamor b'dibur echad. In other words, Zachor and Shamor were actually uttered as one word. So that sort of is very hard for us to grasp, because it's not something that we can do. We cannot say two words in one utterance, but this is, of course, beyond our spectrum of. That's why Hashem is Hashem, of course, and we are human. But the idea is that Hashem pronounced both remember and keep in one utterance. In other words, both of them are vitally important for the sake of keeping Shabbat. So again, just to recap, there were two reasons for the Shabbat according to what we've just learned. One is in order to remind us, to encourage us to sort of re-experience the idea of creation, and the other is to remember and re-experience the whole idea of liberation. So it's creation that's creation that culminated with Shabbat, and it's liberation, which was represented, of course, by human freedom that we were liberated from the Egyptian slavery. So observing the Shabbat and remembering the Shabbat are two different commandments, although both of them do say, observe the Shabbat to keep it holy, remember the Shabbat to keep it holy, which means that the answer in both of them is, in order to properly make Shabbat holy, to keep it holy, we need to observe and remember. So observing and remember are both essential in the idea of keeping Shabbat as per the commandment in the Ten Commandments, which means that Shabbat needs to be in the realm of thought, in the remembering aspect, and also by observing, it's in the realm of action. So what it seems to conclude from this whole lesson is that one by itself is not suffice to achieve the purpose of keeping Shabbat. We need to think about Shabbat, and we need to observe and do something in action in order to make Shabbat holy. So Be'ezrat Hashem, with the desire and the will from every single one of us to make Shabbat holy, and in essence also by making Shabbat holy, we are making ourselves holy. What we need to do is to remember Shabbat. Remember Shabbat as much as possible throughout the week, not only in our thought, but in our action. And in our action, it could be as simple as buying something special for Shabbat, wearing something special for Shabbat. I, for instance, have a special hat for Shabbat. I even have special, leg tights that I wear for Shabbat. Special slippers I have for Shabbat. A special T-shirt, a special head covering. Everything that I could possibly allot, specially for Shabbat, enables me to remember that it's Shabbat, not just by merely the action, but also in the thought. So Be'ezrat Hashem, I pray for all of us that we'll be able to elevate our Shabbat and make it so holy that all week long we're going to remember and we're going to act, and Be'ezrat Hashem will experience the radiance of holiness emanating from Shabbat Kodesh. Shabbat Shalom.